Mana illegal. The word hissed into Naomi Carter's ear before she even turned around. A hard hand clamped onto her shoulder from behind. ICE agent Victor Harlan dug his fingers into the fabric of her charcoal blazer and jerked her backward so violently that her backpack nearly slipped to the floor. "Where do you think you're going?" he sneered. "A black woman with passport stamps from Germany, Turkey and Qatar strolling through my airport like she's above questioning. Not today." Naomi caught her balance without flinching. "My name is Naomi Carter. I'm an American citizen." Harlan gave a mocking laugh and shoved her toward the inspection table. "American, that's what every person with a story tells me. You expect me to believe someone who looks like you've spent more time crossing borders than living here." Several travelers stopped walking. Phones slowly rose into the air. Harlan leaned closer, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Do you know what your problem is? You think wearing a blazer and carrying a passport makes people forget who they're looking at. You're wasting everybody's time." Naomi remained silent. Harlan snatched the black leather case from her hand and spotted the federal security seal. His grin widened. "Oh, this is rich. A black woman carrying a government case. Let me guess you borrowed it, stole it, or found someone important enough to trust you with it." Naomi's eyes hardened. "Do not break that seal." Harlan pulled a utility knife from his pocket and positioned the blade beneath the tamper strip. "Then stand back and watch me prove you're lying." The blade had barely touched the seal when the secure government phone inside the interview room began ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. The display flashed. "Command priority. Call office of the commanding general." For the first time, the young officer beside Harlan turned pale. Harlan reached for the receiver anyway. "If this story speaks to you, don't leave before you see how the truth changes everything. Tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is. We love seeing this community come together from around the world. And if you enjoy powerful stories about dignity, courage, and justice, consider subscribing so you won't miss the ending of Naomi Carter's journey." Hey folks, I've eaten dinner with strangers more times than I can count, and not once did I regret pulling up a chair. 3 hours before ICE agent Victor Harlan put his hand on Naomi Carter's shoulder, she was sitting alone in the last row of an overnight flight from Frankfurt to Dallas. The cabin lights were dim. Most passengers slept with blankets pulled to their chins, their faces softened by the blue glow of small screens. Naomi did not sleep. She sat upright beside the window, her hands resting calmly over a black leather case positioned beneath the seat in front of her. The case was plain, almost boring, except for one small seal pressed into the side flap. It was the kind of seal most people would not notice. The kind of seal-trained eyes knew not to touch. Naomi Carter had learned to stay calm in places where calm was the only thing keeping people alive. She was 36 years old, born in Savannah, Georgia, raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a veterans hospital, and a father who taught her never to lower her eyes for people who confused silence with weakness. Her dark brown skin, steady posture, and quiet eyes had followed her through airports, checkpoints, foreign bases, and rooms where powerful men assumed she was there to take notes instead of give orders. She had stopped correcting every person who underestimated her. That morning, she wore no uniform. Only a charcoal blazer, gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and walking shoes. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her face showed the exhaustion of travel, but not fear. When the plane touched down at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, passengers clapped lightly, then began the impatient ritual of opening overhead bins before the seatbelt sign went off. Naomi waited. She let the crowded aisle clear. She lifted her backpack onto one shoulder, took the black case in her left hand, and walked into the bright, polished terminal like any other traveler returning home. But the moment her passport scanned at the inspection kiosk, the screen flashed yellow. Secondary inspection required. The customs officer behind the counter looked at the message, then looked at her. "Please step to the side, ma'am," Naomi nodded. Of course, she had expected some delay. Her passport carried stamps from Germany, Turkey, Qatar, Poland, and Jordan. Some were official. Some were deliberately ordinary. Her travel history looked complicated to anyone who did not know how to read it. But what she did not expect was the man waiting near the glass partition. Agent Victor Harlan stood with his arms folded, his ICE badge clipped high on his belt, his chin lifted as if the airport belonged to him personally. He watched Naomi approach with the kind of smile that was not a greeting. It was a decision already made. So he said, taking her passport from the customs officer without asking, "Naomi Carter." "Yes," she replied. He flipped through the pages slowly. "Busy traveler." "Yes." "Germany." "Turkey." "Qatar." He looked up. That's quite a route. It was work-related. What kind of work? Naomi kept her voice even. Government-related work. Harlan laughed once, dry and sharp. That's convenient. The customs officer shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Naomi noticed everything. The way Harlan did not ask the same questions he asked the man ahead of her. The way his eyes lingered on her face before returning to her passport. The way his tone changed when he saw her American birthplace printed clearly on the page. Savannah, Georgia. Harlan read aloud. "You were born in Georgia." "I was." "You have another passport number. Any other identification?" Naomi removed a simple wallet from her blazer and placed her driver's license on the counter. Harlan glanced at it and pushed it aside. "That doesn't answer my concern." "What is your concern, Agent Harlan?" His eyes sharpened at the sound of his own name. "My concern is that people lie to get through airports every day." Naomi looked at him steadily. "Then verify my documents." "I will," he said, "after you answer some questions." Behind them, the line continued moving. Families pulled luggage. Businessmen checked watches. A little girl carrying a stuffed rabbit stared at Naomi as if trying to understand why this woman was being separated from everyone else. Harlan stepped closer. "Where did you really come from?" Naomi paused. "I just arrived from Frankfurt." "That's not what I asked." The words landed heavier than they should have. Naomi felt the old familiar weight settle around her shoulders. Not surprise. Not even anger yet. Just recognition. "I am an American citizen returning to the United States," she said. Harlan tilted his head. "You say that like rehearsed testimony. I say it like the truth." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Harlan reached for the black leather case. Naomi's hand moved first, not grabbing, not threatening, only firm. "That case remains with me." His smile widened. "Oh, now we have a problem. It is sealed under federal authority. Federal authority." He repeated loud enough for people nearby to hear. "You hear that she's got federal authority now?" A few travelers slowed down. One man lifted his phone. Naomi did not look at them. She kept her eyes on Harlan. "You can contact the appropriate office and verify the transport code. I don't take instructions from passengers. I'm not giving instructions." "No," he said, leaning closer. "You're giving me a performance." The customs officer cleared his throat. "Agent Harlan, maybe we should run." Harlan snapped his head toward him. "I'll handle it." The officer went quiet. Naomi saw that too. Harlan picked up her passport again and tapped it against the counter. "You know what I see?" he asked. Naomi said nothing. "I see a black woman with too many foreign stamps, a vague story, and a sealed bag she doesn't want opened." Her jaw tightened barely. I see someone who thinks calm answers make bad paperwork disappear. My paperwork is valid. Then you won't mind secondary. I have already agreed to secondary inspection. No, Harlan said, stepping into her space. You agreed because you had no choice. The words were meant to shrink her. They did not. Naomi straightened slightly, shoulders back, chin level, the posture of a woman who had stood in rooms far colder than this airport terminal. Harlan noticed. His expression hardened. You people always have a story, he said. The travelers nearby fell silent. Naomi's eyes did not blink. And somewhere inside the airport's secure system, 11 minutes after her plane had landed, someone opened her file and changed one line that would turn a delay into a trap. Bring your bags. Victor Harlan didn't wait for Naomi Carter to respond. He grabbed the handle of her black leather case and started walking toward a frosted glass interview room near the end of the inspection corridor. Naomi followed without protest. Travelers along the hallway slowed to watch. Several phones remained pointed in her direction. The whispers grew louder with every step. She must have done something. I heard ICE stopped her. I think she's getting deported. Naomi kept her eyes forward. She had learned long ago that humiliation only gained power when someone accepted it. Inside the inspection room, Harlan deliberately left the door halfway open. It wasn't procedure. It was theater. He wanted everyone walking past to see who was being questioned. Put everything on the table, he ordered. Naomi calmly placed her backpack beside the black leather case. My phone. She laid her phone beside the bag. Watch. She removed it. Wallet. She complied again. Harlan folded his arms. Shoes. Without a word, Naomi untied her walking shoes and placed them neatly beneath the metal table. She never argued. She never sighed. Her discipline irritated him far more than resistance would have. Outside the room, TSA officer Lena Brooks happened to pass by, carrying a tablet loaded with passenger clearance reports. She glanced inside only because she heard Harlan's raised voice. Her eyes landed on the leather case. She froze. A small silver security emblem had been embossed beside the seal. She recognized it immediately. Years earlier, during a joint federal security training seminar, instructors had shown images of restricted government transport cases. Personnel had been warned repeatedly. Never open one without proper authorization. Lena stepped toward the doorway. Agent Harlan. He didn't even turn around. What? I think that case may require... I didn't ask for your opinion. It's just... the seal looks federal. I know what a federal seal looks like. Then maybe we should contact... Harlan spun toward her, his expression turning cold. I said I'll handle it. Lena hesitated. Naomi quietly met her eyes for just a second. There was no panic, only a silent request not to make the situation worse. Lena reluctantly stepped back, though the uneasiness stayed with her. Harlan noticed the exchange. You know each other? He asked. No, Naomi answered. Funny. She seemed awfully concerned. Naomi remained silent. Harlan picked up her passport again, flipping through every page. Germany. Another page. Turkey. Another. Qatar. He slammed the passport shut. You've been everywhere except where you claim you belong. I've traveled for work. What work? I've already answered that. I don't like your answer. You don't have to like it. For the first time, Harlan's smile disappeared. He leaned over the table until only inches separated their faces. You know what I think. Naomi said nothing. I think you're lying. I've answered every question truthfully. I think you're hiding behind that calm little voice because you believe it'll make me back off. It won't. The room became painfully quiet. Outside, another family slowed as they walked past the open doorway. Harlan suddenly raised his voice so everyone in the corridor could hear. Let's stop pretending. He pointed directly at Naomi. You are exactly the kind of person ICE exists to find. Several heads turned. Naomi felt dozens of eyes settle on her. Still, she refused to look away. I am an American citizen, Harlan laughed. So you keep saying, my passport confirms it. Passports can be forged. My driver's license, forged. My birth certificate can be verified. We'll see. He circled slowly around the table like a prosecutor building a case. You know what's interesting? He continued loudly. Every time I stop someone with a complicated travel history, they suddenly become an expert on government procedure. Naomi answered quietly. Knowing your rights doesn't make you guilty. No, Harlan replied, but it makes you practiced. A young boy passing outside tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom, she looked down. Why is that lady crying? Naomi hadn't even realized a single tear had escaped. Not because she was afraid, because she knew exactly what those strangers were seeing. Not a decorated American. Not a woman who had spent years serving her country. Only another black woman being treated like she didn't belong. She quickly wiped the tear away before anyone inside noticed. Everyone except Lena. Standing farther down the hallway, Lena watched everything unfold. Something about Naomi's posture bothered her. Not fear, training, years of training. People under ordinary questioning shifted their weight. They crossed their arms. They argued. Naomi stood perfectly balanced, shoulders, square hands relaxed behind her back whenever she wasn't asked to move them. Exactly the way military personnel often stood. Lena's heartbeat quickened. She quietly opened the Federal Reference Directory on her tablet. Before she could search the seal, Harlan barked another order. Enough. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Naomi looked directly at him. Agent Harlan. If you're innocent, he interrupted, you've got nothing to worry about. This is unnecessary. Maybe. The steel cuffs clicked open. But I'm done taking chances. Without another warning, Victor Harlan stepped behind. Naomi grabbed her wrists and snapped the handcuffs shut. The sharp, metallic click echoed into the terminal. Every conversation outside stopped. Phones rose even higher. Lena stared in disbelief. Naomi slowly closed her eyes for one brief second. Not from fear. From the painful realization that no badge, no years of service, and no sacrifice for her country could protect her from being judged before anyone bothered to learn who she really was. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed through the inspection corridor. For a brief moment, even the constant airport announcements seemed to disappear. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still. Her wrists were locked behind her back, but her shoulders remained straight. She refused to bow her head. Victor Harlan smirked as he turned toward the growing crowd. There, he announced loudly. Now we can have an honest conversation. Several travelers continued recording with their phones. One elderly man stepped out of line. His gray Marine Corps cap sat low over weathered eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. A faded American flag pin rested on the lapel of his jacket. He looked at Naomi for only a few seconds before speaking. Agent, the old veteran said calmly, I've spent 30 years in the Marines. Harlan barely glanced at him. So, I know military bearing when I see it. Naomi lowered her eyes slightly, hoping he would stop talking. The veteran continued anyway. That woman has stood at parade rest since you brought her in. She hasn't argued once. She hasn't resisted. That's not how criminals usually behave. Harlan laughed. You've watched too many war movies, old man. No, the veteran answered quietly. I've buried too many soldiers. The hallway fell silent. For just an instant, Harlan's smile faded. Then his arrogance returned. I appreciate your service, he said sarcastically, but this is an ICE investigation. Unless you're wearing a badge, I'd suggest you mind your own business. The veteran's jaw tightened. My business is speaking up when I see someone being treated unfairly. Harlan stepped toward him. And my business is protecting this country. The veteran looked directly into Harlan's eyes. So did I. Neither man moved. The tension was broken only when another officer gently guided the veteran back toward the waiting area. As he walked away, he looked at Naomi. I'm sorry. She offered him the smallest nod. It was enough. Harlan grabbed Naomi's arm. Interview room. Without another word, he escorted her through a secure steel door. The room was small. Gray walls, one metal table, 3 chairs, a ceiling camera, nothing more. Harlan removed the leather case from her reach and placed it in the center of the table. Beside it, he laid her passport, her Georgia driver's license, her wallet, and finally a dark green identification card she had surrendered during the search. He picked it up between 2 fingers. What exactly is this? Naomi answered calmly. A government identification card. I can read. He examined it again. There isn't much information on it. It doesn't require much. Funny. He tossed it back onto the table. You expect me to believe someone dressed in jeans and sneakers carries federal credentials that don't even explain what she does? Naomi remained silent. Harlan leaned back in his chair. A black woman traveling alone through Germany, Turkey, and Qatar with sealed government property? He slowly shook his head. That doesn't look American to me. The words hung in the air. Naomi met his eyes without blinking. Being American isn't determined by where I've traveled. No. It's determined by where I was born, what I've sworn to protect, and what I've sacrificed. Harlan laughed again. Nice speech. It wasn't a speech. It sounded rehearsed. No. She spoke more quietly than before. It sounded true. His expression hardened. You know what bothers me? Naomi waited. You never act scared. I've answered every question. You don't look nervous. I have nothing to hide. Now that's exactly what people hiding something always say. Harlan opened Naomi's passport once more before tossing it across the table. You know what I think? She said nothing. I think you've spent so much time overseas you've forgotten where you belong. Naomi slowly raised her eyes. I know exactly where I belong. The room became silent. Outside, TSA officer Lena Brooks stood near the security desk, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She quietly opened the internal employee database. Not Naomi's record, Victor Harlan's. Nothing unusual. Then she searched the Federal Transportation Reference Guide for the emblem embossed on the leather case. Her heart skipped. Restricted federal security transport. Below it appeared one sentence in bold. Do not open without verified authorization from the originating agency. Lena immediately picked up the phone. I need Supervisor Marta Delaney in interview corridor 3. Minutes later, Marta arrived carrying a tablet. What is it? Lena lowered her voice. I think Agent Harlan is about to make a serious mistake. Inside the interview room, Harlan reached into his pocket and produced a small utility knife. He slowly turned it between his fingers, Naomi's eyes fixed on the blade. "You've been very patient," Harlan said. "But patience has limits." He rested the knife beside the leather case. "I think it's time we found out what's really inside." Naomi finally leaned forward. It was the first deliberate movement she had made since entering the room. "Agent Harlan," he looked up. "If you cut that seal—" Her voice remained calm. "You won't just be violating procedure." He smiled. "You'll be violating federal law." Harlan chuckled. "Still trying to scare me." "I'm trying to warn you." Outside the room, Caleb Ross, a young ICE officer assigned to paperwork, walked toward the terminal computer to finalize Naomi's detention file. As the system loaded, one detail immediately caught his attention. A red audit notification flashed in the corner of the screen. "Record modified 11 minutes ago." Caleb frowned. That was impossible. Naomi's aircraft had landed only moments before. Someone had altered her file before she ever reached secondary inspection. He clicked the audit log. The screen loaded, and his expression changed completely. Caleb Ross stared at the audit log in disbelief. The screen showed Naomi Carter's file had been modified exactly 11 minutes before flight LH-438 from Frankfurt had touched down. That alone made no sense. Passenger records could be updated after arrival. Before arrival was another matter entirely. He clicked the audit history again, hoping he had misread it. The same result appeared. Security classification modified. Inspection priority elevated. Reason code immigration verification. Someone had manually overridden the automated system. Caleb frowned. He had worked for ICE for only 3 years, but he knew enough to recognize that every manual override left a digital fingerprint. The user ID responsible was partially hidden, accessible only to supervisors. He quietly copied the audit reference number onto a notepad before minimizing the screen. Something wasn't right. Inside interview room 3. Victor Harlan sat across from Naomi with the confidence of a man who believed every room belonged to him. The handcuffs remained locked around her wrists. The black leather case sat untouched between them. Harlan leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You've had plenty of opportunities to tell me the truth." "I have." "No." He smiled. "You've told me your version. My version happens to be the truth. We'll decide that." He slid several forms across the metal table. "I can make this easy." Naomi glanced down. The heading immediately caught her attention. Voluntary Statement of Identity Discrepancy. She slowly looked back up. "I won't sign that." "You haven't even read it." "I don't need to. It simply acknowledges that your documents require additional verification." "My documents don't. You don't get to make that decision." Naomi remained perfectly still. "I won't sign." Harlan's smile disappeared. "You understand I can hold you here for hours. I understand the law. I can transfer you to a federal detention center. I understand the law. I can request further investigation. I understand the law." Every answer came in exactly the same calm tone. No anger, no panic, no hesitation. Harlan suddenly slammed his palm against the table. "I'm getting tired of hearing that." Naomi didn't flinch. "I'm sure you are." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Outside the room, Lena Brooks finally reached Supervisor Marta Delaney. Marta studied the reference guide Lena had opened. Her expression tightened. "Where did you see that seal?" "In interview room 3. "Who has the case?" "Agent Harlan." Marta immediately looked toward the hallway. "Did he open it?" "Not yet." Thank God. Stua Marta lowered her voice. That isn't standard government property. What is it? I don't know, but I've seen similar transport cases twice. Where, once with the Secret Service. The second, she hesitated. The Department of Defense. Lena swallowed. You think she's military? I think we don't know enough. Back inside, Harlan picked up Naomi's passport once again. You know what I find interesting? Naomi said nothing. You've never once asked for a lawyer. I don't need one. You've never raised your voice. No. You've never begged me to believe you. No. He leaned closer. Either you're incredibly innocent. His eyes narrowed. Or incredibly trained. For the first time, Naomi allowed herself the faintest smile. I'll let you decide. That answer irritated him more than any argument could have. Meanwhile, Caleb quietly walked toward the supervisor workstation. He searched internal communications linked to Naomi's inspection code. Nothing. Then he checked the access history. Again, one record stood out. Someone had viewed Naomi's itinerary nearly 20 minutes before her aircraft landed. His heartbeat quickened. That wasn't routine. Someone had been waiting for her. Before he could investigate further, Victor Harlan's voice echoed from down the hallway. Ross. Caleb quickly locked his screen. Yes, sir. Bring me the detention packet. Caleb picked up the folder but hesitated before entering the room. As he stepped inside, he noticed Naomi for the first time. She looked tired, not defeated. There was a difference. Even with handcuffs on, she sat upright, her breathing slow and controlled. Caleb had seen military veterans interviewed before. She carried herself exactly the same way. Harlan signed one document before tossing it toward Caleb. File these. Caleb nodded. Then his eyes drifted toward the black leather case. The federal security seal remained intact. Good, at least for now. As he turned to leave, Naomi spoke for the first time since he entered. Officer. Caleb stopped. If you value your career, she looked not at him, but at the leather case. Don't let anyone open that without authorization. Her voice contained no threat, only certainty. Caleb slowly nodded before leaving. Harlan watched the door close. Trying to recruit sympathy now? No. You seem awfully confident someone important is coming. Naomi looked directly at him. I'm confident the truth eventually arrives. He laughed. You've got a lot of faith. I've earned it. That answer lingered in the room longer than either of them expected. Down the corridor, a young African-American mother held her daughter's hand while waiting for a connecting flight. She had watched almost everything. Her little girl, no older than 8, looked toward interview room 3. Mom, yes. Why did they put handcuffs on that lady? Her mother struggled for words. I don't know. Did she hurt someone? I don't think so. The child frowned. She looks nice. The mother's eyes filled with tears. So does your grandfather. The little girl looked confused. He was handcuffed once too. For what? He wasn't? What do you mean he was just, treated like someone people decided not to believe? The girl quietly reached for her mother's hand. Neither of them noticed Lena standing nearby listening. The words struck her harder than she expected. Inside the interview room, Victor Harlan finally stood. I've wasted enough time. He walked around the table until he stood beside the leather case. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket. The utility knife appeared again. Its blade clicked into place. Naomi watched every movement. Agent Harlan. He didn't answer. You still have time. Oh. Call the number printed beneath the transport code. I don't need instructions. You need authorization. He smirked. Do I have authority? No. She met his eyes. You have a badge. The distinction landed like a punch. For a brief second, Harlan's jaw tightened, then pride won. He placed the knife beneath the tamper-proof seal. Outside the room, Caleb looked once more at the audit log. A second notification suddenly appeared. Unauthorized external access attempt detected. His eyes widened. Someone was still manipulating Naomi Carter's file in real time. Don't! Naomi Carter's voice remained calm, but every syllable carried unmistakable urgency. Victor Harlan paused for only a fraction of a second before looking up with a smug grin. Afraid I'm about to expose your little secret? I'm trying to prevent you from making a mistake you can't undo. He laughed. I've heard every excuse in the book. This isn't an excuse. The utility knife remained pressed against the edge of the tamper-proof seal. That seal exists for a reason. So does my badge. Naomi shook her head. Those aren't the same thing. Harlan leaned closer. You've spent the last hour acting like you're more important than everyone else in this building. No. I think you enjoy watching people panic. I haven't panicked once. Exactly. He smirked. People who know they're innocent usually get emotional. You don't. Beholda, Naomi looked directly into his eyes. People who've been trained to stay calm don't always have that luxury. For a brief instant, something flickered across Harlan's face. Curiosity. It disappeared almost immediately. Nice line. It's the truth. Outside the room, Caleb Ross couldn't stop staring at the security log. The second alert kept flashing across his monitor. Unauthorized remote access attempt blocked. He immediately opened the system audit. Someone had tried to access Naomi Carter's file from another terminal inside the airport network, less than 30 seconds earlier. Who, why? He followed the digital trail until another warning appeared. Access denied, supervisor authorization required. Caleb quietly copied the terminal number. It wasn't located in the immigration office. It originated from another secured section of the airport. His stomach tightened. Someone else was involved. Meanwhile, Supervisor Marta Delaney entered the operations office carrying Lena Brooks's tablet. I need access to interview room 3. The duty manager looked surprised. Victor's handling that inspection. I know. Then what's the problem? Marta placed the tablet on the desk. This. The manager studied the federal transport emblem displayed on the screen. His expression changed. Where did you get this image? From the passenger's case. He immediately stood. Has anyone opened it? Not yet. Good. He grabbed his phone. I need to verify something. Minutes passed. The call connected. The manager quietly explained what he had seen before hanging up. What did they say? Lena asked. They couldn't discuss the contents. They confirmed something. They confirmed only one thing. He looked directly at both women. Nobody touches that case until authorization arrives. Lena felt a chill run through her body. Inside the interview room, Harlan had grown impatient. He tossed the utility knife onto the table before sliding another document toward Naomi. This is your last chance. She glanced down. A temporary detention authorization. If you cooperate, he said, this ends faster. I already have. No. He pointed toward the leather case. You've refused to explain that. I explained exactly what I was authorized to explain. Authorized. He repeated the word mockingly. You really enjoy hiding behind that. Naomi remained composed. I follow the law. I enforce the law. Then you should respect it. The room fell silent again. Harlan's jaw tightened. Every answer she gave somehow made him feel less in control. He hated that feeling. Across the hall, Caleb quietly approached Lena. I need to show you something. She followed him to a vacant workstation. Caleb displayed the audit history. Her eyes widened. This file was modified before she landed 11 minutes before. That's impossible. I know. He lowered his voice even further. Someone also tried accessing her file just now. Who? I can't see the name. Can Victor? I don't know. They exchanged uneasy glances. Neither wanted to accuse a fellow officer, but both were beginning to suspect that Naomi's detention wasn't random. Back inside, Naomi checked the wall clock. Nearly 45 minutes had passed. Far too long. Every minute mattered. Not for her, for someone else. She finally spoke. If I miss my transfer window. Harlan rolled his eyes. Here comes another story. People will die. The words settled over the room like heavy smoke. Harlan stared at her, then laughed. Oh, that's a new one. I'm serious. So am I. He leaned forward. You expect me to believe lives depend on you walking out of here? They do. And I'm supposed to ignore procedure because of that? I'm asking you to follow the correct procedure. He shook his head. No. You've already ignored it. Those words struck harder than Naomi intended. For the first time, Harlan looked genuinely irritated. You don't tell me how to do my job. No. She spoke softly. I'm telling you, someone already manipulated this investigation. His eyes narrowed. What did you just say? You heard me. You know something. Naomi held his gaze. I know enough to recognize this isn't a normal inspection. Before Harlan could respond, someone knocked firmly on the open door. Supervisor Marta Delaney entered. Victor. He didn't bother standing. What? I've received instructions. From who? Operations. They can wait. No. She glanced briefly at the leather case. They specifically instructed that nothing inside this room is to be opened until authorization is confirmed. Harlan laughed. Since when does operations supervise ICE? They're coordinating with federal agencies. I am a federal agency. Victor, I've got this under control. Marta lowered her voice. Please don't do anything you'll regret. He stood abruptly. Are you questioning my judgment? I'm asking you to verify before acting. He stepped between Marta and the table. But I don't need permission to inspect suspicious property. Naomi watched the exchange without speaking. Every second that passed increased the pressure. Outside, airport security officers had quietly begun gathering near the corridor, responding to Marta's request without understanding why. The atmosphere inside the terminal had changed. People sensed something unusual was unfolding. Caleb returned to his computer one final time. Another notification appeared. This one wasn't about Naomi's file. It was a system-wide security alert. Classified record access suspended. Below it appeared a message he had never seen before, awaiting federal verification. His pulse quickened. Whatever Naomi Carter was carrying, it had finally triggered attention far beyond the airport. And somewhere outside the building, a secure government convoy had just turned onto the airport access road. The secure government convoy was still 10 minutes away, inside interview room 3. Nobody knew it. Victor Harlan looked at the utility knife in his hand, then at Naomi Carter. "You know what I've decided?" Naomi remained silent. "I'm done listening." He snapped the blade shut and slipped it back into his pocket. "For now." Naomi said nothing. "But don't mistake that for mercy." He walked toward the door and called into the hallway. "Ross?" Caleb hurried over. "Yes, sir." "Prepare transfer paperwork." Caleb frowned. "Transfer. I'm moving her to the Federal Detention Center." The words landed like a hammer. Marta Delaney immediately stepped forward. "Victor, absolutely not." He looked at her with open irritation. "Excuse me. We still haven't verified the federal transport seal." "I don't need to. You've already been instructed to wait." "I don't take operational orders from airport management." So Marta held her ground. "This has gone beyond airport management." Victor folded his arms. Then let whoever thinks they're in charge come tell me personally." Naomi finally spoke. "If you move me now..." Victor turned sharply toward her. "You'll interfere with something much larger than this room." He laughed. "Everything with you is dramatic." "It isn't drama. It's manipulation." Naomi looked directly at him. "I've never asked you to release me." "No. I've only asked you to verify." Victor pointed toward the hallway. "I'm verifying by moving you somewhere that has more resources." "No." Her voice was firmer than before. "You'll be moving me exactly where someone wants me." The room fell silent. Victor narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" Naomi slowly shook her head. "I've already said more than I'm authorized to." His suspicion immediately grew. "So there is something." She didn't answer. Victor interpreted her silence as confirmation. His confidence returned. "I knew it." He looked at Caleb. "Hand me the transfer packet." Caleb didn't move. "Sir." "I said now." Caleb reluctantly passed him the folder. While Victor signed the authorization forms, Caleb's eyes drifted toward the terminal outside the room. His computer screen was still open. The flashing security notification remained visible. "Classified record access suspended." Something about those words refused to leave his mind. Meanwhile, Lena Brooks quietly approached Marta. "I checked Corridor C. And the surveillance cameras." "What did you find?" "They show Agent Harlan arriving nearly 25 minutes before Naomi's plane landed." Marta frowned. "He wasn't scheduled here that early." "I know. He was waiting." Lena nodded. "And he wasn't waiting for random passengers." Marta looked back toward the interview room. He knew she was coming. The realization sent a chill through both women. Inside, Victor finished signing the detention paperwork. He stood. "Cuff chain." Caleb hesitated. "Sir, she's being transferred." Naomi calmly rose from her chair. The handcuffs remained secured behind her back. Victor produced a waist restraint chain. "You don't need that," Naomi said. "I decide what I need." "You've already escalated this far beyond necessity. Chuti, you still think you're giving orders. I'm trying to stop you from making another mistake." Victor stepped behind her and secured the restraint around her waist. The heavy chain clicked into place. Several officers standing outside shifted uncomfortably. Even they felt it was excessive. Naomi had never resisted, never raised her voice, never threatened anyone. Yet she now looked like a dangerous criminal. Victor deliberately opened the interview room door wide. "If everyone wants a show," so he gestured toward Naomi. "Let's give them one." Passengers immediately turned. Some continued filming. Whispers spread across the terminal. They're taking her away. She must have been caught. I knew something was wrong. Naomi heard every word. She didn't lower her head. She kept walking, slowly, steadily, exactly the way she had walked into the airport. Only now, steel surrounded her wrists and waist. The elderly Marine veteran was still sitting near gate D-17. When he saw Naomi escorted through the terminal in restraints, he stood immediately. "This is enough." His voice echoed across the corridor. Victor stopped walking. "I told you to stay out of this." The veteran ignored him. He stepped closer until another officer gently blocked his path. "I've escorted prisoners during combat," the old Marine said. "They didn't carry themselves like that woman." Victor rolled his eyes. "Your opinion has been noted." "No." The veteran pointed toward Naomi. "You're treating someone who's cooperated with every order like she's an armed fugitive." Victor's expression hardened. "You questioning my judgment. I'm questioning your character." The surrounding crowd became completely silent. Victor took one step toward the old Marine. "One more word, and I'll have airport police remove you." The veteran never backed away. "I've worn this country's uniform." He tapped the faded Marine emblem on his cap. "And whatever she's hiding." He glanced at Naomi. "I know service when I see it." Naomi briefly met his eyes. There was gratitude there, but also something else. Concern. She didn't want anyone else pulled into what was happening. "Sir," she said quietly. "Please." The veteran understood immediately. He nodded once, then stepped back. Victor smiled. Smart decision. But the old Marine wasn't looking at Victor anymore. He was watching Naomi. And in his heart, he became certain of one thing: she wasn't the danger. At the operations desk, Caleb reopened the audit log. His breathing stopped. A newly decrypted entry had appeared. Unlike the previous alerts, this one displayed a phone number linked to an incoming call received by Victor Harlan's government-issued cell phone. The timestamp caught Caleb's attention. 32 minutes before Naomi's aircraft landed, someone had called Victor before the plane even touched down. He clicked the originating number. The system refused access. Restricted pending federal review. Caleb stared at the screen. His pulse raced. Victor hadn't randomly selected Naomi. Someone had directed him to intercept her. As Victor escorted Naomi toward the secured detention elevator, another sound suddenly interrupted the tense silence. A sharp, electronic vibration. Not Naomi's phone. Not Victor's. The encrypted government communication device resting inside the sealed leather case had activated. One short vibration, then another. A tiny green indicator light began flashing beneath the untouched federal seal. Naomi stopped walking. She looked at the case for the first time since leaving the interview room. Her expression changed, only slightly, but Caleb noticed. Victor noticed too. "What now?" he scoffed. Naomi took a slow breath. "They've realized I didn't arrive." Victor laughed. She looked him straight in the eyes. "They're coming. They're coming." Naomi Carter spoke so quietly that only Victor Harlan heard her. He answered with a sarcastic chuckle. "I've heard enough of your imaginary friends." Without another word, he grabbed the chain around Naomi's waist and continued pulling her toward the detention elevator. The tiny green light beneath the federal seal continued flashing. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it went dark. Caleb Ross couldn't stop staring at the leather case. He had never seen government equipment behave like that. Before he could ask another question, every computer terminal along the corridor suddenly went black. The airport Wi-Fi disconnected. Security monitors froze. For nearly 3 seconds, the entire inspection area became eerily silent. Then one by one, the monitors restarted. Instead of the normal airport dashboard, every government terminal displayed the same message in bold white letters. Federal access override initiated. Victor frowned. What the hell is this? No one answered. A loud electronic tone echoed throughout the operations office. The secure government phone mounted on the wall began ringing. Not once, continuously. The ringtone was unlike any ordinary telephone. Every officer in the room instinctively turned toward it. Supervisor Marta Delaney's eyes widened. She had heard that tone only once before during a joint federal emergency exercise. Victor walked toward the phone. I'll take it. Marta immediately stepped between him and the receiver. No. He stared at her. Move. Not until we know who's calling. Victor shoved past her and lifted the handset. This is Agent Victor Harlan. The voice that answered was calm, measured, powerful. This is Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison. Victor's expression barely changed. I don't know who you think. You will listen. The entire room became silent. I am Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison, Commanding General of United States Army Intelligence Operations. Victor glanced toward Naomi. She remained perfectly still. The general continued. You currently have one of my officers in restraints. Victor forced a laugh. Sir, with respect, she's under an immigration investigation. No. The general's voice became colder. She is conducting a classified federal mission under direct military authority. Victor swallowed. No one in the room dared move. You are interfering with an active national security operation. Victor looked toward Naomi again. For the first time since detaining her, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. There must be some misunderstanding. There is. The general paused. It belongs entirely to you. Marta slowly exhaled. Caleb lowered his head. Lena covered her mouth. Victor tightened his grip on the receiver. Sir, she refused to explain who she was. She is not authorized to explain. But she followed protocol? Victor looked around the room as every pair of eyes shifted toward him. You had no authority to detain her. The words struck like a hammer. I believed her documents were suspicious. Her identity has been verified repeatedly through federal channels. Victor felt sweat forming beneath his collar. The transport case, classified. The seal, protected under federal law. Victor's breathing became shallow. I didn't open it. You came dangerously close. The general's tone hardened even further. Release Major Naomi Carter immediately. The room froze. Major. The word echoed through everyone's mind. Caleb stared at Naomi in disbelief. Lena's eyes filled with shock. The elderly Marine veteran, still watching from the terminal entrance, slowly straightened his posture. Victor looked at Naomi as though seeing her for the first time. She stood exactly as she had throughout the entire ordeal. Calm, disciplined, silent. Nothing about her posture had changed, only everyone else's understanding. Victor cleared his throat. Major. Naomi didn't answer. General Ellison spoke again. This conversation is not finished. Victor forced himself to respond. Yes, sir. Within the next 3 minutes, a joint federal response team will arrive. Marta's head snapped toward the terminal windows. Outside, black SUVs were already turning onto the secured airport roadway. The general continued. Nobody leaves that corridor. Victor's confidence completely disappeared. What is happening? You will be briefed after my officer is released. His voice became razor-sharp. And Agent Harlan. Yes, sir. If a single document has been altered, he paused, or if anyone has interfered with Major Carter's mission. Another long silence followed. This airport is about to become the scene of a federal criminal investigation. The line went dead. No one spoke. Victor slowly lowered the receiver. The room was utterly silent except for the distant sound of approaching engines outside. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Naomi finally looked at him. Her voice remained gentle. I told you to verify. Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His hands trembled. Marta stepped forward. Take the restraints off. Victor didn't move. Agent Harlan. Still nothing. Caleb quietly approached. Sir. Victor looked at the handcuff key hanging from his own belt. His fingers refused to cooperate. Caleb carefully removed the key himself. He stepped behind Naomi. I'm sorry, ma'am. The steel cuffs unlocked with a soft, metallic click. Then the waist chain fell away. Naomi slowly rubbed her wrists but said nothing. She didn't glare. She didn't smile. She simply picked up the black leather case and checked the federal seal. Untouched. Only then did she release a quiet breath. Outside, tires screeched to a stop. Black government SUVs surrounded the terminal entrance. Men and women in dark tactical jackets moved with practiced precision toward the inspection corridor. Every badge they carried displayed 3 letters. FBI. The automatic doors burst open. 8 FBI agents moved into the inspection corridor with disciplined precision, followed by 2 Army Criminal Investigation Division investigators and several military police officers. Their movements were calm, coordinated, and unmistakably official. The lead FBI agent, Special Agent Daniel Brooks, stopped directly in front of Naomi Carter. He didn't hesitate. Major Carter. Naomi nodded once. Agent Brooks. Are you injured? I'm fine. Only then did Brooks turn toward Victor Harlan. Agent Harlan, step away from Major Carter. Victor swallowed. I was only following procedure. Brooks's expression never changed. Keep your hands where I can see them. The surrounding officers exchanged nervous glances. Minutes earlier, Victor had been the man giving orders. Now no one looked to him for direction. Brooks accepted a sealed authorization folder from one of the CID investigators before handing it to Naomi. She broke the seal, reviewed a single page, then looked up. My authorization has been restored. Brooks nodded. You may brief us. Everyone in the room listened. Naomi placed the black leather case on the inspection table but did not open it. My mission began 6 months ago. Her voice was steady. A joint military and federal task force uncovered evidence that an international human trafficking network had infiltrated several transportation hubs entering the United States. Silence filled the room. The organization wasn't moving weapons. It was moving people. She paused. Children. Lena covered her mouth. The elderly Marine veteran lowered his head. Naomi continued. The evidence connecting the network to American contacts is inside this transport case. She rested one hand gently on the leather case. It contains encrypted intelligence identifying financial records, communication logs, and undercover reports gathered overseas. Brooks added quietly, if those files had been compromised, years of investigation could have collapsed overnight. Victor's face drained of color. I didn't know. Naomi looked at him calmly. I know. But why didn't you tell me? Because I legally couldn't. Brooks answered before Naomi could speak. Major Carter followed federal security protocol exactly as required. The room remained silent. She was specifically prohibited from revealing her assignment to anyone without the proper clearance. Victor slowly looked down. For the first time all morning, he had nothing to say. "Now," Brooks continued, "let's discuss how this happened." He nodded toward Caleb Ross. "You reported irregularities." "Yes, sir." Caleb handed over the audit logs he had printed moments earlier. "I found manual modifications to Major Carter's file." Brooks reviewed the documents, 11 minutes before her aircraft landed. "Yes, sir." Another FBI digital forensic specialist connected a secure tablet to the airport network. Within seconds, the system reconstructed every access made to Naomi's record. A timeline appeared on the monitor. 11:18 a.m. passenger record viewed. 11:22 a.m. security classification manually changed. 11:24 a.m. immigration inspection priority elevated. 11:26 a.m. direct notification sent to Agent Victor Harlan. The room fell silent. Brooks slowly turned toward Victor. "Were you expecting Major Carter?" Victor hesitated. "I received a notification." "From whom, I don't know." Brooks nodded toward the forensic specialist. "Show us." The specialist enlarged another screen. A phone log appeared. One incoming call. 32 minutes before flight LH-438 landed. The originating number had finally been decrypted. It wasn't an airport office. It belonged to a disposable encrypted phone purchased only 4 days earlier. Victor stared at it. "I've never seen that number." Brooks looked at him carefully. "You answered the call." "I thought it came from headquarters." "What were you told?" Victor closed his eyes. "They said a woman arriving from Frankfurt was traveling under false identification." His voice grew weaker. "Saktitsa, and that she was carrying sensitive material that needed to be intercepted before customs cleared her." Brooks didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward Naomi. She nodded once. "Exactly what we feared." Lena frowned. "You mean?" Naomi answered. "Someone inside the trafficking organization knew I was coming home." Every person in the room felt the weight of those words. "The leak wasn't overseas," Naomi continued. "It was here." The forensic specialist suddenly spoke. "We've got another match." Everyone looked toward his monitor. "The unauthorized access terminal." He pointed to a floor map of the airport. "It originated from Office C-17. Brooks frowned. "Who occupies C-17 Airport Management?" Quickly checked the directory. "No permanent employee." "Temporary contractor access?" "Assigned yesterday." Brooks immediately spoke into his radio. "Secure Office C-17. 2 FBI agents sprinted from the corridor. Only 3 minutes later, their voices crackled back over the radio. "Office empty. Recovered 2 laptops. Multiple burner phones. Documents being destroyed." Brooks looked at Naomi. "They ran." Naomi nodded. "They expected me to disappear into detention long enough for them to clean up." Victor slowly sank into a nearby chair. The truth finally reached him. He had never been investigating Naomi. He had been manipulated into stopping the one person carrying evidence against a criminal organization. Brooks wasn't finished. "Agent Harlan." Victor looked up. "You repeatedly ignored requests to verify federal authority." "Yes." "You refused supervisory instructions." "Yes." "You publicly humiliated an American citizen without sufficient evidence." Victor lowered his head. "Yes." "And your actions delayed a classified federal operation." The room remained silent. Victor whispered, I made the biggest mistake of my career. Brooks looked at him steadily. No. He nodded toward the digital evidence displayed across every monitor. Your biggest mistake was assuming your instincts were enough when the law required evidence. Just then, another FBI agent returned carrying a sealed evidence bag. Sir. What did you find? A cash transfer. He placed printed bank records on the table. $25,000 wired through 3 shell accounts. Victor frowned. What's that got to do with me? The agent answered. It wasn't sent to you. He pointed toward another name highlighted in red. It was sent to the contractor who altered Major Carter's records. Naomi quietly closed the leather case again. They never needed every officer to be corrupt. She looked around the room. They only needed one person to change one file, and someone else willing to believe it without asking enough questions. Nobody argued, because everyone knew she was right. The airport returned to normal only after nearly 4 hours. The crowds dispersed. Flights resumed. The boarding announcements echoed through the terminal as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But for everyone who had witnessed the events in Corridor 3, nothing would ever look quite the same again. 2 weeks later, the official investigation concluded with findings that stunned both the Department of Homeland Security and ICE leadership. The temporary contractor assigned to Office C-17 had been working under a false identity for nearly 8 months. Financial records connected him to the same international human trafficking organization Major Naomi Carter had spent months helping dismantle overseas. His assignment had been painfully simple. Modify 1 passenger record. Delay 1 officer. Buy enough time for the organization's American contacts to erase evidence and disappear. He failed. The laptops recovered from Office C-17 contained encrypted communications, payment records, false identities, and transportation routes used to move victims across multiple states. Within days, coordinated raids took place in Texas, Arizona, Georgia, and Florida. Dozens of victims, including several missing children who had been searched for over a year, were rescued safely. More than 30 members of the trafficking organization were arrested. The operation Naomi had risked everything to protect had succeeded. ICE immediately opened an internal administrative investigation into Victor Harlan's conduct. Body camera footage, airport surveillance, witness statements. Every minute of the encounter was reviewed. The findings were impossible to ignore. Harlan had ignored repeated warnings from fellow employees. He had refused supervisory guidance. He had publicly humiliated an American citizen without sufficient evidence. Most importantly, he had failed to follow the very verification procedures his own agency required. His federal credentials were suspended pending disciplinary action. Before leaving the building for the final time, Victor requested one thing. He wanted to speak with Naomi. She agreed. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room inside the airport administration offices. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Victor looked older than he had only 2 weeks earlier. The confidence that had once filled every word was gone. I owe you an apology, he finally said. Naomi remained silent. I judged you before I knew you. She nodded slightly. You did. I convinced myself I was protecting the country. You forgot what protecting it actually means. Victor lowered his eyes. I've replayed that day 100 times. So have I. I can't change it. No. She looked directly at him. But you can learn from it. Victor hesitated before asking the question that had haunted him since General Ellison's phone call. Were you angry? Naomi smiled sadly. I was disappointed. Why disappointed? Because I spent years serving the same flag you believed I didn't belong under. Neither of them spoke again for several moments. Finally, Victor quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." Naomi extended her hand. He looked surprised. She spoke gently. "How justice isn't complete unless someone has the chance to choose who they become next." Victor shook her hand. It would not erase what had happened, but it was the first honest thing either of them had shared. Caleb Ross's decision to preserve the audit logs earned praise from federal investigators. His attention to detail proved critical in exposing how Naomi's file had been manipulated. Months later, he accepted a position on a joint federal integrity task force, specializing in internal accountability. When reporters asked why he transferred, his answer was simple. The truth only survives when someone is willing to protect it. Lena Brooks also received formal recognition. Her refusal to ignore the unusual federal seal and her decision to notify Supervisor Marta Delaney, despite being dismissed, prevented a classified evidence package from being unlawfully opened. At the recognition ceremony, Marta smiled proudly. "You trusted your training instead of your assumptions." Lena replied, "I trusted the feeling that something wasn't right." Several weeks later, Naomi returned to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. This time, she wore her Army service uniform. The rows of ribbons on her chest caught the morning sunlight as she walked through the same terminal where she had once stood in handcuffs. Passengers recognized her from news reports. Some quietly applauded. Others simply stepped aside with newfound respect. Near Gate D-17 stood the elderly Marine veteran. He immediately recognized her. Without saying a word, the old man stood at attention. Then he delivered a slow, perfect salute. Naomi smiled. She returned the salute with equal precision. When they lowered their hands, the veteran chuckled softly. "I knew it." "Knew what?" Naomi asked. "I knew I'd seen that posture before." She laughed for the first time in weeks. "You trusted your instincts." "No." The veteran smiled. "I trusted your character." Nearby, the young African-American mother and her daughter happened to witness the moment. The little girl looked up at her mother. "That's the lady." Her mother nodded. "Yes." The child smiled brightly. "She looks like a hero." Naomi overheard the words. She walked over and knelt so they were eye level. "No," she said gently. "A hero is anyone who chooses to do the right thing when nobody is watching." She looked toward Caleb, Lena, Marta, and the old Marine. They were heroes too. The little girl thought about that. Then she smiled. "I want to be like all of you." Naomi's eyes warmed. "So does America." As she walked toward her departure gate, travelers no longer saw a suspicious passenger. They saw an officer, a servant of her country, a woman whose dignity had never depended on someone else's opinion, because dignity cannot be granted by prejudice, and it can never be taken away by it.
Never let appearances become your evidence or assumptions become your judgment. True character is revealed through integrity, courage, and the choices people make when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about justice, dignity, and hope.